Nia Brooks was less than an hour away from open-heart surgery when her phone vibrated. A new message appeared on the screen. For one hopeful second, she thought it was her husband. Maybe Marcus was finally calling. Maybe he was on his way. Instead, it was a video. Nia pressed play. Marcus appeared on the screen sitting beside a beautiful young woman in a luxury Miami penthouse, laughing into a podcast microphone while thousands of viewers watched live. Then he said 6 words that destroyed his entire life. Some people weaponized sickness for attention. The audience laughed. The comments exploded. Clips began spreading across social media before the live stream had even ended. What none of those people knew was that the woman Marcus was mocking was lying in a hospital bed less than an hour away from open-heart surgery. His wife. The woman who had funded his career. The woman who had built his brand. The woman whose support had made every success attached to his name possible. And the one person who could take it all away. Marcus thought he was humiliating a weak woman. What he didn't know was that everything he had spent years building rested on a foundation that had never belonged to him. A foundation he had overlooked for so long that he no longer even knew it existed. And before this story was over, thousands of people would watch that foundation disappear beneath his feet. Nia stared at the screen. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Behind her, a heart monitor continued its steady rhythm, counting down the minutes until doctors would wheel her into surgery. A soft voice broke the silence. "Ma'am." Nia looked up. The young nurse adjusting her foreline glanced nervously toward the phone. "Is that your husband?" Nia looked back at the screen. Marcus was still laughing, still talking, still pretending to be a man who had built himself. And in that moment, Nia finally understood something she should have realized years ago. She hadn't been abandoned on the morning of her surgery. She had been abandoned long before. She had simply been the last person to admit it. This is the story of what happened after a man turned his wife's suffering into entertainment for millions of strangers. Because Marcus Brooks believed he had all the power. He believed the woman he was betraying needed him. He believed she would always be there to carry him. He was wrong. And by the time he discovered just how wrong he was, the audience he'd worked so hard to build would be watching him lose everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy powerful stories of betrayal, resilience, and unexpected justice, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now, to understand how Marcus Brooks ended up laughing about his wife's illness in front of thousands of people, you first need to understand Nia. Nia Brooks was the kind of woman people relied on without realizing how much it cost her. She had been raised in Houston by her Aunt Denise after losing both parents while she was still young. Denise spent more than 30 years working as a nurse and taught Nia one lesson that shaped the rest of her life. "Cry if you need to," she always said. "Just keep moving." And Nia did. She worked her way through architecture school, built a respected career, bought her own home, built her own future. By her early 30s, she was one of the most respected architects at her firm. Everything she had came from discipline, sacrifice, and hard work. Everything except one thing. Years earlier, her grandfather had left her a small commercial building on Houston's east side. It wasn't particularly valuable, at least not at the time. So Nia kept it, collected the rent, and eventually stopped thinking about it. That building would matter again one day. Neither of them knew how much. 8 years before the surgery, Nia met him. Back then, Marcus was a personal trainer with a charming smile, endless ambition, and a gift for making people believe in him. Especially her. For the first time in her life, Nia felt like she had found someone she wouldn't have to carry. She was wrong. At first, Marcus felt different. He was charming, attentive, and full of plans for a future that sounded exciting every time he described it. Nia had spent most of her life taking care of herself. Marcus made her believe she might finally have someone to lean on. They married 2 years later. And for a while, life looked exactly the way she'd hoped it would, at least from the outside. Then Marcus's fitness business collapsed. The clients stopped coming. The bills piled up. The excuses multiplied. Nia never complained. She paid the rent, covered the shortfalls, picked up the pieces. Marcus called it a temporary setback. Nia believed him. Then one evening Marcus announced he'd discovered his real purpose. Podcasting. Not fitness. Not coaching. Not training. Podcasting. He wanted to build a platform teaching people about success, confidence, discipline, and what he liked to call high-value living. Most people would have laughed. Nia didn't. She bought him his first professional microphone, helped design his website, connected him with people she knew through work, paid for equipment, paid for advertising, paid for the studio upgrades when the audience started growing. Every major step forward in Marcus's career had Nia's fingerprints on it. The audience never knew. Marcus never mentioned it. And Nia never asked for credit. She thought they were building something together. Marcus increasingly acted like he was building it alone. As the podcast grew, so did his ego. The bigger the audience became, the less interested he seemed in the people closest to him, especially his wife. At first it was subtle. Missed dinners, late nights, constant filming. Everything became content. Everything became branding. Everything became Marcus. Whenever Nia tried to talk about it, he always had a reason. The show needed him. The audience needed him. The business needed him. Eventually, she stopped bringing it up. She convinced herself this was simply the price of success. Then her body started sending warnings. At first it was exhaustion, the kind sleep didn't fix. Then came the chest flutters, the dizziness, the mornings where climbing a flight of stairs felt strangely difficult. Nia blamed stress, long work hours, too much coffee, too many deadlines. Aunt Denise blamed none of those things. "You need a doctor," Denise said. "I'm fine." That's exactly what people say before they aren't. A week later, Nia scheduled an appointment. The cardiologist's office was quiet in the way serious places always are. The doctor reviewed her test results carefully before speaking. An autoimmune condition had attacked her heart. The damage was progressing. Without treatment, it would continue getting worse. There was still time to help her, but not much. Surgery would be necessary. Soon. Nia sat frozen while the doctor explained risks, recovery timelines, medications, and procedures. Most of the words blurred together. One thought kept repeating itself. Marcus. For once, she didn't want to be the strong one. For once, she wanted someone else to carry the weight. Driving home, she imagined telling him. She imagined him holding her, comforting her, promising she wouldn't face it alone. She found him exactly where she expected, inside the studio, recording another episode. She waited nearly 15 minutes for him to finish. When he finally removed his headphones, she told him everything. The diagnosis, the surgery, the risks, the fear she'd been carrying since leaving the doctor's office. For a moment, Marcus looked shocked. Then he pulled her into a hug. Relief washed through her. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe all the distance she'd been feeling wasn't real. Maybe her husband would show up when it mattered. Then he stepped back. "We'll get through it," he said. Nia nodded. "We'll handle it together." Another nod. Then Marcus smiled. The same polished smile he used for cameras. "I just need you to understand something." The relief inside her immediately began to fade. "I have to protect my own peace through this." Nia stared at him. Marcus continued. "If I get consumed by fear and hospital stuff, I'm not helping anyone. Not you. Not myself. Not the business." The business. She had just told him her heart was failing. And somehow the conversation had become about his emotional comfort. Again. "You understand, right?" he asked. Nia looked around the studio she had paid for, the equipment she had funded, the business she had helped build. And for the first time, a thought entered her mind that she couldn't completely push away. What if Marcus loved what she provided more than he loved her? The thought scared her, so she buried it. Unfortunately, the truth doesn't disappear just because you refuse to look at it. And over the next few weeks, the truth became impossible to ignore. As Nia prepared for surgery, Marcus became more distant than ever. The studio suddenly required overnight work sessions. Business trips appeared out of nowhere. Phone calls ended when she entered rooms. Conversations became shorter. Excuses became longer. And then another name started appearing. Kiara. Marcus called her a brand consultant, a social media strategist, someone helping expand the show. Nia wanted to believe him. At first, she did. But deep down, something was already telling her exactly where this story was headed. And for the first time in 8 years, she was starting to listen. The first time Nia met Kiara James, she understood two things immediately. The first was that Kiara was beautiful. The second was that Kiara believed every word Marcus told her. It happened at a content creator event Marcus insisted Nia attend. She was exhausted. Her surgery was only weeks away. But Marcus claimed it would look bad if his wife didn't show up. So she went. Kiara greeted her with a bright smile and the kind of enthusiasm that seemed completely genuine. "Oh my gosh," she said, pulling Nia into a hug. You're the architect. Nia smiled politely. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Marcus talks about you all the time. Nia almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because she knew it wasn't true. Marcus barely talked to her anymore. Yet standing there looking at Kiara's excited face, Nia realized something important. Kiara wasn't pretending. She genuinely believed she knew Marcus, which meant Marcus had been telling her stories. Lots of stories, just not truthful ones. The realization followed Nia home and stayed with her. Over the next several weeks, the distance inside her marriage became impossible to ignore. Marcus was physically present, but emotionally, he might as well have lived somewhere else. Every conversation somehow circled back to him. His stress, his business, his audience, his goals, his future. Meanwhile, Nia was preparing for open-heart surgery. Alone. One evening she finally stopped pretending everything was fine. They were sitting at the kitchen table. Marcus scrolling through comments on his phone. Nia gathering courage. I'm scared. Marcus looked up. What? The surgery. The words felt smaller once they were spoken aloud. I'm scared, Marcus. For a moment she thought she saw concern in his eyes. Then came the expression she had started seeing more and more often. The podcast expression. The one he wore when preparing to sound wise. I hear you. Nia's stomach tightened. Whenever Marcus said those 3 words, it usually meant he wasn't listening at all. I do, he continued. But I think you're putting a lot of responsibility on me right now. Nia blinked. What? I can't become your therapist, Nia. The words landed like a slap. I'm your wife. And I love you. The answer came too quickly, too smoothly, like something rehearsed. But your healing journey is your responsibility. I can't carry that for you. Nia stared at him. Somehow she had come to him for comfort, and ended up feeling guilty for needing it. By the end of the conversation, she found herself apologizing. Apologizing for being afraid of open-heart surgery. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how she had become the problem in a conversation about her own heart failing. The next afternoon, Aunt Denise stopped by. Officially, she was delivering soup. Unofficially, she was checking on her niece. Denise took one look at Nia and immediately knew something was wrong. Years of nursing had taught her to read what people try to hide. The exhaustion, the sadness, the loneliness. None of it escaped her. How's Marcus? The question was casual. Nia's hesitation wasn't. Denise noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed. He has a lot going on. Denise sighed. The sigh of someone whose patience had finally expired. Nia. What? That man loves you exactly as much as you're useful to him. The room fell silent. Nia felt immediate anger. Not because the words were cruel. Because they sounded possible. That's not fair. Maybe. Denise set down the soup container. Maybe I'm wrong. She met Nia's eyes. But I've spent 30 years watching women explain away men who didn't deserve them. Nia looked away. Denise grabbed her purse, then paused at the door. The day you stop carrying him, she said quietly, is the day you find out who he really is. Then she left. The words stayed. A week later, Nia had her answer. It happened late at night. A bad flare-up. The worst she'd experienced yet. Her chest tightened. Her breathing became difficult. Pain radiated through her body. By the time she reached the bathroom, her legs were shaking. She lowered herself onto the floor. Cold tile against her back. Trying to breathe. Trying not to panic. Trying to remember what the doctors had taught her. Marcus. Her voice was weak. No answer. Marcus. This time louder. She heard footsteps. Relief flooded through her. He was coming. The footsteps reached the bathroom door, then stopped. Nia waited. Seconds passed. Then she heard the footsteps continue down the hallway. Away from her. Not toward her. Away. She sat frozen. Confused. Then she heard Marcus's voice. Talking. Laughing. On the phone. At first she couldn't make out the words. Then she heard a name. Kiara. Nia closed her eyes. And listened. Nah. Marcus laughed. She's fine. Another pause. Then. Trust me, babe. She does this all the time. Nia felt her blood run cold. A laugh came through the phone. Marcus laughed too. Then he said the sentence that destroyed whatever remained of their marriage. The doctor appointments. The sad face. The whole thing. Another laugh. It's how she keeps me on a leash. Silence. Nia sat on the bathroom floor, unable to move. Unable to breathe. Unable to process what she had just heard. Her husband thought her illness was manipulation. Or worse. Maybe he knew it wasn't. And simply didn't care. For a long time, she sat there listening to his voice drift through the hallway. Eventually, something inside her changed. Not dramatically, not loudly. Something simply stopped fighting reality. Marcus wasn't confused. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't struggling to cope. He had made a choice. And now she needed to make one too. She would stop explaining him. Stop defending him. Stop protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. The next morning, Nia started paying attention. Really paying attention. She reviewed bank accounts she hadn't checked in months. Then she checked them again, certain she had made a mistake. She hadn't. Their savings account was nearly empty. Not low. Empty. The money she'd spent years building was gone. Transfer after transfer after transfer. Most of it had gone into Marcus's podcast company. Studio expenses. Equipment. Marketing. Expansion. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when she started digging deeper. There were loans. Large ones. Business debt. And when she opened the paperwork, her hands began to shake. Because her name was on it. Not just Marcus's. Both of theirs. She stared at the documents in disbelief. Marcus hadn't just drained their savings. He had tied her financially to a business she never agreed to finance. A business that was now drowning in debt. The man preparing to leave her had been using her money to fund his escape. By sunrise, Nia had stopped crying. She started making a list instead. And that list would change everything. Before we continue, I have to ask, of everything Marcus has done so far, what do you think is the worst? Was it the affair? Ignoring Nia when she needed him most? Draining the savings she spent years building? Or putting business debt in her name without her knowledge? Let us know in the comments. I read every one of them, and I'm curious to see which betrayal crossed the line for you. Because what Nia discovers next is something Marcus never saw coming. By sunrise, Nia had a plan. Not a revenge plan. A survival plan. For years, she had handled problems the same way she handled architectural projects. She gathered information, studied the structure, found the weak points. Then she acted. Quietly, carefully, precisely. So while Marcus continued living as though nothing had changed, Nia started protecting herself. She opened a new bank account, moved the income that belonged solely to her, downloaded years of financial records, made copies of loan documents, saved emails, backed up statements, photographed everything, every transfer, every signature, every piece of evidence. Then she met with a divorce attorney. She didn't file. Not yet. She simply needed to know where she stood. The attorney reviewed the documents in silence. When she finished, she looked up. Does your husband know you're here? No. Good. The answer came immediately. Keep it that way. For the first time in weeks, Nia felt something close to relief. Not because her problems were solved. Because she finally knew she wasn't imagining them. The marriage wasn't collapsing. It had already collapsed. She was simply one of the last people to realize it. Meanwhile, Marcus was busy playing a different role. The role of a man who had already moved on. 3 days before Nia's surgery, he didn't come home. Then he didn't come home the next night either. He was in Miami. With Kiara. Nia found out the same way everyone else did. Social media. Kiara wasn't hiding anything. Why would she? As far as Kiara knew, Marcus was trapped in a miserable marriage and finally finding happiness. The photos appeared one after another. Luxury hotels. Ocean views. Private dinners. Champagne glasses. Sunsets. Marcus smiling like a man without a care in the world. One photo showed them standing on a penthouse balcony overlooking the water. The caption read, "Finally protecting my peace." Nia stared at the image for a long moment. Then she closed the app. The next morning, she attended a pre-surgery consultation where doctors explained how they planned to stop her heart. And started again. One conversation was happening in a Miami penthouse. The other was happening in a hospital. Only one of them was real. But Miami wasn't what finally broke the illusion. The podcast did that. Because Marcus had become addicted to something far more dangerous than attention. Validation. The bigger his audience grew, the more he believed his own performance. And in Miami, surrounded by applause, agreement, and a younger woman who treated him like a genius, Marcus made the worst decision of his life. He turned his wife into content. The recording happened the day before surgery. The upload happened the morning of it. While Nia was being prepared for open-heart surgery, Marcus's team published a new clip from his podcast. The title spread across social media almost immediately. People shared it, reacted to it, argued about it. Then came the quote, the sentence that would follow him for the rest of his life. Some people weaponize sickness because they can't survive without attention. The audience laughed. Marcus smiled. And then he kept going. A strong man doesn't negotiate with emotional hostages. More laughter. More applause. More clips. Within hours, millions of people had seen it. Most viewers assumed he was speaking generally. Some suspected he was talking about his wife. The people closest to him knew exactly who he meant. And so did Nia. Less than an hour before surgery, her phone vibrated. A message. Someone had sent her the clip. That was the video she watched in the hospital room. That was the moment she saw her husband sitting beside another woman while mocking the illness that might kill her. That was the moment the nurse quietly asked, "Is that your husband?" And that was the moment something inside Nia finally went still. Not broken. Still. The kind of stillness that comes when a person stops hoping. The kind of stillness that arrives when the truth becomes impossible to deny. The surgery team entered a few minutes later. Doctors, nurses, orderlies. One of them smiled gently. "We're ready for you, Ms. Brooks." Nia locked her phone, set it aside, and nodded. As they wheeled her toward the operating room, she didn't think about Marcus. Not anymore. She thought about Aunt Denise. About her grandfather. About the life she wanted if she survived. And for the first time in a very long time, that life did not include her husband. The surgery lasted 6 hours. 6 long hours during which Marcus never called, never showed up, never asked for an update. The only family member waiting at the hospital was Aunt Denise. Exactly where she had always been. Exactly where Marcus should have been. When the surgeon finally emerged to speak with her, Denise stood so quickly she nearly knocked over her chair. The surgeon smiled. The procedure was successful. Denise closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Because despite everything else happening in the story, one fact mattered more than all of it. Nia was alive. But survival was only the beginning. Because while Marcus was busy celebrating his freedom, Nia was about to remember something that would destroy the foundation beneath his entire empire. Something she hadn't thought about in years. A building. And Marcus had no idea what was coming. Recovery was slow. Painfully slow. Every movement hurt. Every breath reminded Nia of the scar running down the center of her chest. The doctors called it progress. Some days it felt more like survival. Aunt Denise was there for all of it. The physical therapy. The medications. The sleepless nights. The difficult mornings. She never asked about Marcus. Not at first. There wasn't much left to ask. The silence itself answered every question. On the third night after surgery, Nia finally cried. Not because of the pain. Not because of the scar. Not even because of the betrayal. She cried because she stopped waiting. For weeks, a small part of her had still hoped Marcus would show up. Call. Apologize. Explain. Do something. Anything. Now she knew he wouldn't. And strangely, that realization hurt less than the waiting. By dawn, the tears were gone. In their place was something far more useful. Clarity. For the first time in years, Nia wasn't trying to save her marriage. She was trying to save herself. And that's when she remembered the building. The thought arrived unexpectedly during one of her recovery sessions. Not as a plan. Not as a strategy. Just a memory. Her grandfather's building. The small commercial property on Houston's east side that had quietly generated rent for years. Then another thought followed. Marcus's studio. Nia froze. The studio. The address. The lease. And then it hit her. Marcus's studio was inside her building. She sat upright so suddenly that Aunt Denise looked up. "What is it?" Nia barely heard her. Every podcast episode. Every live stream. Every speech about being self-made. Every success Marcus bragged about. It had all been built inside property he didn't own. Property that belonged to her. For the first time since her surgery, Nia smiled. Not because she wanted revenge. Because she finally understood something. Marcus thought he owned the empire. But he had never owned the ground beneath it. She called her attorney immediately. The documents arrived the next day. Nia reviewed every page. Then reviewed them again. And halfway through, she found what she was looking for. Or more accurately, what Marcus had failed to notice. The podcast company was behind on rent. Not by 1 month. Not by 2. 4. For consecutive missed payments. Nia blinked. Then looked again. The numbers didn't change. Marcus had been so busy funding his lifestyle, his image, and his relationship with Kiara that he had stopped paying rent altogether. Her attorney confirmed it. The company was in breach. Completely. Legally. Undeniably. Nia sat in silence. Years earlier, When establishing the property under Brooks Holdings LLC, she'd insisted on strong lease protections. At the time, she was simply being responsible. Now those protections mattered. A lot. The lease contained clear default provisions. If rent remained unpaid beyond a specified period, the landlord could terminate the agreement and reclaim the property. No drama. No public fight. No emotional argument. Just law. Marcus's entire business was standing inside a building he no longer had the legal right to occupy. For the first time since surgery, Nia smiled. Not because she was happy, because she finally understood something. Marcus thought he was winning because he only looked at what was visible. The followers, the views, the sponsorships, the attention. He never paid attention to foundations. Nia did. She was an architect. Foundations were her specialty. And Marcus had spent years ignoring the one foundation that mattered most. The one beneath his own feet. Over the next several weeks, Nia focused on healing. Physically, emotionally, financially. Meanwhile, her attorney handled the rest. Everything was done quietly, professionally, legally. No social media posts. No threats. No dramatic confrontations. Just paperwork. Notice after notice. Deadline after deadline. Procedure after procedure. The way consequences are supposed to work. Marcus never noticed. Or if he did, he didn't take it seriously. Which wasn't surprising. For years, someone else had handled the details for him. Someone else had solved problems. Someone else had protected him from mistakes. He assumed that would continue. He assumed Nia would continue. He was wrong. Weeks passed. Then one morning, the final documents were signed. The property would be reclaimed. The locks would be changed. The studio would be emptied. And Marcus wouldn't learn any of it until it was already done. Nia's attorney asked a simple question. Are you sure? Nia looked down at the paperwork. Thought about the surgery, the affair, the missing money, the viral clip, the hospital room, the empty chair beside her bed. Then she signed. Her hand never shook. Yes. The attorney nodded. Then we're finished. Nia shook her head. No. She looked out the window. Somewhere across Houston, Marcus was probably recording another episode. Still talking. Still performing. Still convinced he was untouchable. We're just getting started. Marcus arrived at the studio feeling unstoppable. His latest clips were performing well. His audience was growing again. Sponsors were calling. The controversy surrounding his comments about illness had faded just enough for him to convince himself he'd survived it. In his mind, the worst was behind him. He couldn't have been more wrong. He pulled into the parking lot carrying a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. A live stream was scheduled to start in less than an hour. Thousands of viewers had already set reminders. Marcus planned to talk about growth, resilience, success, the usual things. Then he noticed something strange. The door. The keypad was gone. Marcus stopped walking. For several seconds, he simply stared. A heavy commercial lock had replaced the electronic system. He frowned. Maybe maintenance. Maybe a mistake. He stepped closer. Tried the handle. Locked. He pulled out his phone and checked for messages. Nothing. He knocked. No answer. Then he looked through the glass and felt his stomach drop. The studio was empty. Not closed. Not under construction. Empty. The desk was gone. The cameras were gone. The lights were gone. The furniture was gone. Even the giant custom sign bearing his name had disappeared. It looked less like a studio and more like a building that had never contained one. Marcus stood frozen. Coffee forgotten. Heart racing. Trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He immediately called his producer. Voicemail. He called his assistant. No answer. He called his operations manager. Straight to voicemail. One call after another. Nothing. Finally, his assistant picked up. Thank God, Marcus snapped. What is going on? Silence. Then a nervous voice. I'm sorry. What happened? More silence. Then, the movers came yesterday. Marcus blinked. The what? They had paperwork. What paperwork? Another pause. The answer came quietly. Legal paperwork. Marcus felt the first real wave of panic. Who authorized this? His assistant hesitated, then said the one thing he never expected to hear. The property owner. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone. Property owner? What property owner? Then he saw the documents taped neatly to the inside of the glass door. Several pages. Official notices. Legal documents. He stepped closer. Notice of default. Termination of lease. Reclamation of property. The words blurred together as he skimmed. His eyes moved rapidly down the page. until they stopped on the company name printed at the bottom. Brooks Holdings LLC. Marcus frowned. Brooks, his last name. For one brief moment, he thought there had been some mistake. Then another thought arrived. A terrible one. His hands shook as he pulled up the public business records on his phone. A few seconds later, the registration appeared. Owner, Nia Brooks. Marcus stared at the screen, then at the building, then back at the screen. Suddenly, memories started connecting. The property, the lease, the paperwork he'd never read, the signatures he'd ignored, the details he'd left for other people to handle. His entire studio sat inside a building owned by his wife. No, not his wife. His soon-to-be ex-wife. And she had just taken it back. Marcus looked through the glass once more. The empty room stared back. For years he had stood inside that studio telling the world he was self-made. Every episode, every speech, every lecture, every success, all recorded inside a building that had never belonged to him. The irony was so brutal, it almost felt deliberate. But it wasn't. Nia hadn't trapped him. She had simply stopped protecting him. And without her protection, the truth had finally caught up. A smart man would have gone home. A smart man would have called a lawyer. A smart man would have stayed off the internet. Marcus did none of those things. Instead, he went live. Right there in the parking lot. Because Marcus had spent so many years performing for an audience that he no longer knew how to process humiliation privately. Within minutes, thousands of viewers joined. Then tens of thousands. They watched him pace, argue, complain, read portions of the legal notices aloud. They watched confusion become panic, panic become anger, anger become desperation. And then someone in the comments found the public property records. The screenshots spread instantly. Nia Brooks. Owner. Brooks Holdings LLC. Owner. The building. Owner. The comments exploded. Wait, she owns the studio? The wife he mocked. The sick wife? The one he said was using illness for attention? More screenshots appeared. Old clips resurfaced. The viral podcast segment. The Miami photos. The hospital timeline. Everything started colliding at once. And for the first time, Marcus couldn't control the narrative. Because the facts were public. The facts were documented. The facts didn't care how charismatic he was. Viewers began connecting the dots faster than he could explain them. The story he'd spent months telling suddenly collapsed. The powerful man escaping a difficult marriage. Gone. The self-made entrepreneur. Gone. The high-value mentor. Gone. In their place stood something far less impressive. A man who had mocked his sick wife while benefiting from her money, her support, and property she owned. The internet can forgive many things. Hypocrisy isn't usually one of them. Sponsors started disappearing. Partnerships paused. Collaborators distanced themselves. Reaction channels picked up the story. Former supporters turned into critics. Everything Marcus had spent years building began falling apart in a matter of days. And the worst part? Nia never said a word. No interview. No public statement. No revenge video. No social media campaign. She didn't need one. Marcus had exposed himself. The audience was simply reacting to what they finally saw. While all of this was happening, Nia was in physical therapy. Learning how to trust her body again. Learning how to breathe through discomfort. Learning how to walk farther each day than she had the day before. Her phone remained silent in her bag. She didn't watch the live stream. Didn't read the comments. Didn't celebrate. When Aunt Denise eventually told her what happened, Nia's response surprised even herself. She felt nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. No excitement. Just peace. Because the studio was never the victory. The victory was realizing she no longer needed Marcus to become a better man. The victory was understanding she could move forward without him. The victory was surviving. Everything else was just paperwork. The collapse of Marcus's brand didn't happen all at once. It happened the way most real collapses do. Piece by piece. A sponsor withdrew. Then another. A partnership ended. A speaking engagement was canceled. Former supporters stopped defending him. New viewers discovered the story and asked questions his audience had never thought to ask before. Questions Marcus couldn't answer. Not honestly. Because every honest answer led back to the same uncomfortable truth. The woman he called weak had been carrying far more than he ever admitted. And once she stopped carrying him, everyone could see it. The divorce took months. Nia approached it the same way she approached everything else. Quietly. Methodically. Without drama. Without public statements. Without trying to win the internet. She wasn't interested in revenge anymore. She was interested in freedom. Fortunately, She'd done something Marcus never expected. She had kept records. Every transfer, every loan document, every financial statement, every piece of evidence. The debt Marcus had buried under both their names became a major issue during the proceedings. But documentation is difficult to argue with. The records showed where the money went, who benefited, who authorized it, and who had been left carrying the risk. In the end, the outcome wasn't perfect. Real life rarely is. But it was fair. Fair was enough. Nia wasn't looking for victory. She was looking for an ending. And eventually, she got one. Marcus, meanwhile, discovered that attention can disappear as quickly as it arrives. The audience that once applauded every word now questioned everything. His content changed, then changed again, then changed again. Nothing worked. Because the issue was never branding. The issue was trust. And trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, especially when millions of people watched it break. Even Kiara eventually left. Not after one argument. Not after one bad week. After she finally understood who Marcus really was. The version she had fallen for didn't exist. It had never existed. She thought she was choosing a strong man trapped in an unhappy marriage. Instead, she found a man who had spent years standing on someone else's shoulders while claiming he stood alone. And once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. By the time she walked away, she was just another person who had believed the story instead of examining the facts. Nia spent that same year building something entirely different. Something real. The idea came to her during recovery, during the long nights, the difficult therapy sessions, the moments when she realized how many women were carrying invisible burdens while pretending they were fine, especially Black women, women whose pain was often minimized, dismissed, ignored, women who spent so much time taking care of everyone else that nobody noticed when they needed help themselves. Nia knew that feeling. She had lived it. So she decided to build something she wished had existed when she needed it most. A foundation, a place providing support, resources, education, and community for women navigating chronic illness. Nothing flashy, nothing designed for attention, just meaningful work. The kind that changes lives one person at a time. She named it after her grandfather, the man who had seen potential in her long before anyone else did. The man who had left her the building that ultimately changed everything. Aunt Denise joined the board immediately. Neither woman was surprised. Within a year, the foundation was helping people across the state. Then beyond it, letters started arriving. Emails, messages, stories. Women sharing experiences that sounded painfully familiar. Many ended the same way, with a simple sentence. I finally feel seen. Every time Nia read those words, she thought about the hospital room, the surgery, the loneliness, the woman she had been, and the woman she had become. The last time she saw Marcus was in a courthouse hallway. The divorce was finalized. The paperwork was complete. The marriage was over. Marcus looked older. Not physically, emotionally, like life had finally forced him to carry his own weight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus cleared his throat. We can talk, you know. Nia said nothing. I never wanted things to end like this. Still nothing. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. You know I never meant for. He stopped. Because for the first time, he realized she wasn't waiting for an explanation. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She wasn't waiting for anything. The woman who had spent years hoping he would change was gone. In her place stood someone who no longer needed him to. Nia looked at him calmly. Not with anger. Not with hatred. Just clarity. Then she turned and walked away. No speech. No final argument. No dramatic goodbye. Some endings don't need words. This was one of them. A few months later, Nia sat alone in her office after everyone else had gone home. The foundation had just finished another successful event. The building was quiet. The city lights glowed beyond the windows. For a long moment, she rested a hand over the scar beneath her blouse. The scar that reminded her every day of what she survived. Her heart still wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was beating. Strong enough. Steady enough. Still here. And so was she. Years earlier, she had believed strength meant carrying everything. The marriage, the finances, the responsibilities, the burdens. Now she understood something different. Real strength isn't carrying people who refuse to walk beside you. Real strength is knowing when to set them down. Marcus spent years calling himself a strong man. Yet the moment Nia stopped carrying him, he collapsed. Maybe that was the lesson in all of this. The person doing the loudest talking about strength isn't always the strongest person in the room. Sometimes the strongest person is the one quietly holding everything together. And sometimes the strongest thing that person can do is finally let go. So let me ask you this. Who was truly strong in this story? Marcus, who spent years convincing the world he was self-made? Or Nia, who survived betrayal, survived surgery, rebuilt her life, and never once needed an audience to prove her worth? And one more question. If Marcus had shown up at that hospital, if he had simply held her hand, if he had chosen love over ego, do you think Nia would have ever discovered how much she deserved? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more powerful stories of betrayal, resilience, and unexpected justice. Because sometimes the ending of one story is the beginning of another. Until next time.